Hello everyone, my name is Will Beebe, aka Dumbo Plays Minecraft, and in today's episode of Learning Biology in Minecraft, we'll be discussing how disturbances like prescribed fires affect the biodiversity in the herbaceous layer of an oak-hickory forest in Grinnell, Iowa, and whether there is an ideal frequency of prescribed fires in order to increase the biodiversity of these native species. Before we get into the study, let's do a quick background on some information that will be important for you to understand the study. So, physical disturbances such as fire play an important role as a recurring disturbance in many terrestrial communities, as they may have dramatic effects on the abundances of individual species and the structure of multi-species communities. In this study, we are interested in how disturbances affect community structure. Species richness, which is the number of coexisting species, and relative abundance, or evenness, are key features of a community structure. But what do these mean? And how do we measure species abundance and richness? Well, let me show you this real quick. So species richness is how many species there are in an area. So if we look over here at these two plots, we see that there's different species and different species richness. So in this here, there's like a donkey, a cow, polar bear, and a panda, and a cat. So there's like 5 different species. But over here, there's only foxes. So the species richness of this plot is greater than the species richness with only the foxes. Furthermore, species abundance is how abundant the different species are relative to one another. How many individuals there are representing that species in that area, which is quantified in the form of evenness indices. Some species may be hugely abundant, others there's very little, or maybe the species may be evenly abundant. So looking at these two plots, they all have the same amount of species, total species, but here in this plot, the species abundance of the pigs is much greater, is higher than the species abundance of the mule, cow, polar bear, panda, or the cat. So if we were to plot it over here, the species abundance for the pig would be somewhere up here, while the other animals would be somewhere down here. However, in this plot here, we see that the amount of species in the plot is even. So they all have the same species abundance, and it's like a much more even distribution. So they would all be on the same level around here. So when we combine these measures, we can create a species diversity indices that summarizes community structure. The most commonly used diversity measures is the Shannon-Weiner index, or H', and we can see that by viewing this here formula, where H' is the value of the Shannon-Weiner diversity index. Pi is the proportion of species I. The natural log of Pi is natural log of Pi right there, and S is the number of species in the community, or species richness. So it's whenever the species 1 to however many species are in the population, you're able to calculate that. And we go back here, and we know the minimum value of H' is 0, and which is the value of a community with a single species. So the H' value for this plot would be 0 because there's only foxes, but for these it would be higher because as the index increases in value, the index increases in value as species richness and evenness increase. So this one would be 0, and these ones would be higher. So now that we understand how community structure and diversity is made up and how to determine them, let's look at how disturbances might affect a community structure. So you might ask what a disturbance is. Well, P.S. White and S. Pickett, 1985, defined disturbances as any relatively discrete event in time that disrupts ecosystems, community, or population structure and changes resources, substratability, or the physical environment. Furthermore, Wayne Seuss in 1984 defined disturbances as a discrete, punctuated killing or displacement or damaging of one or more individuals or colonies that directly or indirectly creates an opportunity for new individuals or colonies to become established. So let me see here. Let's take, for example, a plowed field versus an unplowed field. And also let me set the time here back today. Okay, so yeah, let's take an example, look at a newly plowed field in comparison to a field that has not been plowed in a long time. So plowing represents a kind of disturbance where things are messed up for whatever organisms that are currently living in that place by destroying or removing them. So say this is our plowed field and this is our unplowed field. Well, all the organisms that were in this unplowed part of the field, they're able to continue on with their life. However, the plowed field, it all just kind of got messed up for those organisms because they got displaced or they died or whatever just because of the simple act of plowing. There's a lot of other different types of disturbances. For example, we could flood an environment. So boom, see those two flowers, they just got wiped out. That's a type of disturbance. Also, like volcanic eruptions and stuff can cause disturbances. Fires can cause disturbances, and we'll get to looking at that in a second. And even mining. So this is an ecosystem. What if we want this coal here and we want to mine it and excavate the coal? Well, we can use some TNT, and so we're going to go below, boom, and that there is a disturbance. So, yes, so the change in community structures that occurs over time following a disturbance is referred to as succession. So, what happens after we've plowed the field and it starts to grow back and stuff like that? So disturbances such as fires affect community structure by altering the physical conditions of the area temporarily, which affects the performance of organisms and their population dynamics and community dynamics. So with the opening of new space, succession enables the colonization of species that may not have been an original community member and or were rare before the disturbance. So succession, this is therefore, as entailed by Joseph Grinnell's intermediate disturbance hypothesis, intermediate and periodic disturbance may promote higher levels of species diversity in a community. And this is because intermediate levels of disturbance allow enough time for a variety of organisms to colonize in between disturbances while not allowing enough time to enable competitive exclusion. Furthermore, both high and low levels of disturbance may reduce species diversities in a community. If a disturbance is frequent and or intense, the community will be composed of organisms that are able to quickly colonize and go through their life cycles between the frequent disturbances. If there are infrequent low-intensity disturbances, the community will be mainly composed of organisms that are the best competitors in terms of being able to use limited resources most efficiently or inhibiting the others that they are competing with. Now, to test the intermediate hypothesis and determine whether annual fall burns increase species diversity, we performed a study at an oak-hickory forest in Grinnell, Iowa, and in this study we viewed the effects of fire on biodiversity of the community of ephemeral plants, which are plants that grow in the spring. Oh, wrong. Am I going right? Where is it? Yeah. Plants that grow in the spring and do not survive for long, along with the shrub communities that grow in a deciduous forest. Not much is known about how fires affect the understory of herbaceous or the non-woody plant communities on the forest floor. And so that would comprise, for this example, all these different flowers and grasses that represent the plants that we observed in our study. So now let's take a look at how this experiment was set up and what we found. In 1997, their 19 25 meter by 25 meter plots were established in this oak-hickory forest at the Conard Environmental Research Area, aka Sierra, in Grinnell, Iowa. 10 plots are burned annually in the fall since 1998, and 9 plots have not been burned. And the dispersion of the burned, unburned plots are uniform. So in this layout here in Minecraft, the redstone represents the burned plots, and the blue lapis lazuli represents the unburned plots. Also, this data was collected in the spring of 2019, and actually not this year due to the coronavirus, because we were not able to collect the data since we had to go home. And during that time frame, there was an overhanging branch that was a liability in this burned plot, so no data was collected. So we had an even 9 burned plots and 9 unburned plots. So now that we have like these different plots and we burn them annually, how did we collect the data? So we sampled the plots by laying out a meter tape across the edge of the plot, and then took a random number generator to select 4 random points along that tape. So let's go over here. I have something set up. The string represents the meter tape. So this is the outside of the plot. So we had so we'd randomly have a point, 4 points, and so we'd pick a point, and then on these 4 points, we placed another tape perpendicular to it and laid it out, and selected 4 more random points where we would lay down a 1 by 1 meter quadrat. And we had 16 random points where we would place 16 1 by meter quadrats. And so in this, we'll have this is the first 25 meter tape, so we selected like random point. I'm just going to do 1. So say it was here, we'd go along here for 25 meters, and then at those different points, we would select 4 random points, and we would result in 4 different quadrants along that point, along that tape. So I just only have 1 here, and this white wool square represents 1 quadrat. And then also, if like we would have another one, we would have done the line like this, and say it landed here, there'd be 4 more along this line. So yeah. Then within these quadrats, for each species, we counted the number of quadrats in which the species occurred and divided by the total quadrats sampled to determine the quadrat frequency, or QI. So for example, let's say there is 16 quadrats in this plot, and I don't have that because it's only 10 blocks and it's kind of hard with Minecraft only being able to have 1 like kind of plant per thing. But say there were 16 quadrats, and out of all 16 there was only 8 quadrats that had these here dandelions. That would give us a quadrat frequency of 0.5, because we would divide 8, which is how many quadrats had the dandelion, by 16, which is the total number of quadrats. Then for each 1 meter squared quadrat, we record the species richness, which is the total number of species encountered inside the frame. So again, we are limited by Minecraft in this sense, because we don't have that many species in this quadrat. But the species richness for this one is 4, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4. However, the species richness for this one is 3. 1, 2, 3. There's only 3 species, and they're all encountered inside the frame. Some could have 0, some could have 1, and you could just keep going higher and higher depending on the quadrat and the location of the study. So using all this information, we were able to calculate how diverse the plant community was on a fine spatial scale by averaging the total number of species across all quadrants sampled to get the mean total number of species per meter squared. We also were able to calculate the species richness per plot by counting the total number of species encountered in the whole plot. So for this one, let's say, we'll just say there's these 2, even though there'd be 16. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different species. So the species richness for this plot would be 6. However, it was obviously different for the real thing, but you get the idea. And then this allowed us to determine the H prime, or the Shannon Weiner diversity index for each plot. And we had to first calculate the proportion of each species in the plot, PI. So, given all this information on how everything was sampled, how the experiment was set up, and the stuff that we learned over there about species richness, abundance, and disturbances in H prime, what did we find? So, in this experiment, we actually found that the annual fall burns do not actually increase or decrease biodiversity in the no burn plots. There was no significant difference between the two. The Shannon Weiner diversity index actually displayed that the mean for both the values was 2.73. So although it wasn't a monoculture because it wasn't zero, so they're both pretty diverse in their species. Interestingly, the intervals between the burn plots were actually tighter than the intervals between the no burn plots. So let's say, so for the most part, the biodiversity for all the burn plots was very similar. However, for the unburned plots, this one could have had a higher biodiversity value, or H prime value, than the average of 2.73, maybe 2.9, and this one could have been 2.5. And because of these, they were all kind of different like that, but it ended up averaging out to 2.73, which was the same as the burn plots. Furthermore, we found that the mean number of species per meter squared was also not significantly different for both the burned and unburned plots, and we found that the burned and unburned plots had approximately 9 species each. So no matter the treatment, within each plot, within the 1 meter squared, on average there was about 9 species. And this indicates that the diversity in the plant community on a fine spatial scale between the treatments was virtually the same. And then lastly, despite the previous two community composition measures not being different or significant, the species per plot between the burned and unburned plots were actually significant. We found that the total number of species per plot in the burned plots was significantly lower than the unburned plots, with the burned plots having a mean value of 20.4 and the unburned plots having a mean value of 24. So the burned plots on average had less species than the unburned plots. So this one had about 20 and this one had about 24. And this indicates that although the biodiversity between the two treatments were the same, or the total number of organisms were different, with the unburned plots having more organisms on the plots on average. So the species richness was greater in the burned plots. So maybe the species evenness was better in the unburned plots or something like that. And actually these findings are similar to what Hutchinson et al. Found. They found that in oak-dominated forests, repeated fires do not cause large changes in herb layer vegetation and can increase small-scale richness of native herbaceous species without facilitating the invasive exotic species. Interestingly, they also found that the topographic factors contributed to overall compositional variation more than prescribed fires. And due to this, let me set the time. Due to this, for future studies, it would be interesting to potentially view the effect of the topographical features within this Grinnell oak-hickory forest, how it affects species biodiversity. So like just looking at this here, this area is like raised up more, so maybe these plants have more access to light than these, and like how shade impacts things. And also over here there's like a little water pool, so that might affect species, the biodiversity of the plots. Also, as we noted, the H prime for both the unburned and the burned plots was about 2.73. So like contrary to the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, where intermediate disturbances are supposed to increase biodiversity and low and high frequency disturbances are supposed to decrease biodiversity, we found that the disturbance didn't impact the biodiversity at all really whatsoever. And so is that a good thing or a bad thing? I guess it depends, but the whole goal of the prescribed fires is to increase biodiversity and get rid of non-native and invasive species. So obviously we need to do something about that and change the interval of the burns in order to increase the biodiversity, the native biodiversity. And so what future studies could do is change the intervals of the prescribed fires. So right now they're set for the fall of every year annually. So what if for a while we set the intervals to every 6 months, or the intervals to every 18 months, and so we could get an idea of whether we need to have the disturbance more frequent or less frequent, and find the proper time period and intervals in order to increase biodiversity, native biodiversity. So that's kind of all I have for you guys today. It's raining now, which is also another disturbance. This can cause flooding, and I guess also thunderstorms. If lightning struck, it could cause a fire. But yes, so I hope this was educational and you all understood it. If you have any questions, leave any of your questions down in the comments section, and I'll see you guys on the next episode of Learning Biology in Minecraft. Peace out. Have a great day.